If you look at voter behavior in behavioral political economy and think about a low probability of decisiveness causing rational ignorance, one argument against that can be Donald Wittman's miracle of aggregation, where he says, apply rational expectations and the problem of ignorant voters goes away. We no longer are going to end up with inefficient policies. Bryan Caplan disagrees with this, not with the logic that Wittman puts forward, but with the idea that we should be applying rational expectations. Here, we will look at Kaplan's response to the idea of rational ignorance, the miracle of aggregation with rational expectations applied, and the efficiency of democracy as put forward by Donald Wittman. We will look at Kaplan's idea called rational irrationality. The basic idea that Kaplan puts forward is that rational expectations should not be applied. If we don't apply the rational expectations, then the miracle of aggregation doesn't happen, and we could end up with the inefficient outcomes. So let's think of a different example here where rational expectations shouldn't be applied. We can think of estimating the average weight of an adult male. If you ask just the average population versus asking just cross-country runners, who are stick thin and don't wear very much, right? They underestimate just how heavy the rest of the population may be. So if you asked just cross-country runners, hey, how heavy is this average adult male? There would be a bias, there would be a systematic bias to their estimate as to what the weight would actually be. Well, what if voters are not uninformed randomly, canceling each other out, but instead we're biased by some incentives or biased in some way similar to the cross-country runners? The cross-country runners have a bias. They underestimate how heavy the average person is. There is not this there's not this uniform canceling out of, well, I guess too high, I guess too low, I guess too high in terms of the adult male's weight. Instead, they're frequently guessing too low, too low, too low, too low. They are biased in their estimate. This is basically Kaplan's argument, that we're systematically biased. Uninformed voters don't just cancel each other out, they actually skew the result. The example here is protectionism in trade. Does the average person just randomly not understand protectionism? No, they have a bias towards it. They believe that trade is zero sum. They believe that protectionism is a positive policy that we should put forward. So the median preference with this bias is further towards the right. It's further towards, one direction, that we're overestimating the benefits of protectionism. It is not just random error around the right answer. The entire distribution has shifted, in this case, to the right, but it could shift in either direction for or against some kind of policy idea. The optimal policy here is shown as the left distribution that we have. So the correct view is actually theoretically right here. So the distribution that we should expect to see in terms of different policies would be this distribution right here. And instead, the distribution that we actually see is this distribution here, because there is a bias to the beliefs of the average people that believe in protectionism more than they actually should. How can voters be systematically biased? Kaplan created a model to help us think about that. Just as economists think of agents weighing the costs and benefits of information, so too can we think of the agents weighing the costs and benefits of rationality. Just as it is sometimes rational to be ignorant, it may sometimes be rational to be irrational, to deviate from full rationality. This he calls rational irrationality. Why would anyone want this good of irrationality? Kaplan argues three things. One, there's comfort. People derive comfort, security, and a sense of identity from their belief structure. This is a very big, important reason. We may just cling to whatever beliefs and that we already have, even if we're shown evidence to the contrary. We just kind of say, you know what? It's more important for me to believe these things than to be actually correct. A second reason that Caplan gives is ease. Rational thinking is hard, painful, and discouraging work. It's far easier just to believe what you want to believe. And a third element is that there's a social reason. Other people you depend on may treat you differently depending on your beliefs. This is kind of an indirect reason, but it might be easier for you to hold on to certain beliefs or to hold certain beliefs because of what the rest of the world is doing, even if it is not necessarily the correct belief. Our ability to consume irrationality is our superpower. We don't have to go through life facing our constant errors and reassessing our entire worldview. If some evidence doesn't hinder our day-to-day ability to get by, we take that evidence, we mentally manipulate it, and we make ourselves okay with whatever comes our way. Within Kaplan's model, we can think of irrationality as a normal good. In economics, with normal goods, you have a downward sloping demand curve. Here, with irrationality, we can model that the exact same way. The quantity of irrationality could be on the x-axis, and the implicit price of irrationality on the y-axis. This is basically Kaplan's model of our superhero ability to go through life without having to actually deal with constant errors in a reassessment of our entire worldview. You can contrast this with the neoclassical demand for irrationality. No matter the price, there is no quantity demanded. In neoclassical economics, there is no irrationality. Caplan contrasts this. He says that with rational irrationality, the idea is that the demand curve is near neoclassical. But if the price is low enough, perhaps we indulge in some irrationality. So once the price gets high enough, our quantity consumed is zero. But at very, very low prices, we actually will consume some irrationality. When the price of irrationality is high, as it often will be, you consume less or zero. When the price of irrationality is low, you consume more. When irrationality is completely free, people stick with whatever belief makes them the most happy, however crazy. We consume irrationality. Irrationality is like a normal good in Kaplan's system. This is the idea of rational irrationality. Well, so what? Why does it matter if some people want to consume irrationality for thinking about behavioral political economy? Why do I need to go back to applying the basic insight of a downward sloping demand curve and think about how more is preferred to less and that it relates to price? Well, if we look at Kaplan's model, the expected price of voter irrationality is essentially zero because of the low probability of decisiveness. So, in Kaplan's model, we should not be surprised if voters hold highly irrational beliefs. How can voters be systematically biased? Well, if people deviate from rationality for similar reasons or in similar directions, we get a bias within their irrationality. Lots of survey data exists on systematically biased beliefs about policies. For example, how minimum wage laws work, make work programs, the impact of foreigners on the economy, protectionist trade policies, standard of living benefits of market economies, and other elements like this. People have systematically biased beliefs about these things. Well, so what if people have systematically biased beliefs? Well, if people irrationally indulge their beliefs about policies, they may just be pretending to help. They may have beliefs that they think are actually beneficial, but are actually harmful. If we think about it, the probability of decisiveness is basically zero in voting. And so you get rational ignorance. The miracle of aggregation says no problem if we have rational expectations. Rational irrationality counters with a downward sloping demand for rationality and says don't apply rational expectations quite yet because we will actually be consuming some irrationality. And if our irrationality is biased in a certain way, then we could end up with bias towards certain policies. Well, Are any cognitive biases existing that could help us make systematic error? Our superpower can be our own enemy. In behavioral economics, we see that we have many cognitive biases, and that can create this systematic error. Our ability to go on and be irrational in some ideas creates the problem of the paradox of democracy. The paradox of democracy is the problem is not from the rulers and the ruled diverging. Democracy, as Caplan argues, is giving us what we want, but what we want is bad and harmful policy. The problem is our superpower, our ability to be rationally irrational.